If New Orleans Saints quarterback Derek Carr wants to make the best out of his 2024, he's got to pick up where he left off in 2023, but do it all over again against much better competition. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode, we're taking a look at how Derek Carr's 2024 is incredibly intriguing and how it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. We'll break down how the Saints have their quarterback for now, but have also already started their search for the quarterback of their future. We'll get to Derek Carr's contract, because looking at it now, a year later, it looks like a contract you'd expect for a quarterback in 2024. We're going to kick everything off with looking at why 2024, Derek Carr's production has to pick up exactly where it left off in 2023, but what's going to make that complicated? We got all that and much more for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day, and for being an everydayer here on the Locked On Saints podcast, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends at FanDuel. All summer long, they're giving out bonuses and boosts for every user every day. There's something brand new every single day for you to take advantage of over at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's where you're going to want to go to get started today. All right, so as we get started with today's episode, let me be very clear. Derek Carr's 2024 has to begin as strongly as his 2023 finished. Here's where the challenge for that begins. Competition. Doesn't mean that he can't do it, but the competition will make this a little bit stronger. Remember, over the course of the last 5 games that the New Orleans Saints played last year, Derek Carr looked really good. In fact, he was outstanding. 4-1 over the course of that time was the team. Defense had a lot to do with that as well. Derek Carr's 14-2 touchdown to interception ratio, second best in the NFL. Completion percentage of 74%, best in the NFL. Passer rating of 118.9, 118.9, was also first in the NFL. Now, I'm not calculating yardage into this, okay? I'm not going to do that, because the yardage over the course of the past 5 or 6 games was also really impressive, but the last 5 games included a game against the Los Angeles Rams where the team had to throw itself back as best as it could. Throw itself back into the game as best as it could all throughout. And then the last 6 games also includes a Detroit Lions game where the Saints fell down 3 scores at the very beginning and then had to try to catch up as much as they can. So I'm not including yardage in terms of looking at those last 5 games or those last 6 games, because to me, that's an empty stat. That doesn't actually tell the story about how well this team performed on the offensive side down the stretch. Good enough? No. Good? Better? Yes, than where they started. That's for certain. You look at the last 5 games of the season, the opponents included the Carolina Panthers, the New York Giants, the Los Angeles Rams, as we mentioned, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Atlanta Falcons. Not a very inspiring group of teams for you to be able to sit back and say, wow, the Saints did a really, really good job of making sure that they were, on top of their game. And that's really, really impressive. Now you go to the beginning of their 2024 schedule, where they open against those Carolina Panthers, but also have games against the Dallas Cowboys, the Philadelphia Eagles, you have an Atlanta Falcons game, and then you have the Kansas City Chiefs. The last 5 games of the 2023 season couldn't be any more different in terms of talent of opponent than the beginning of the 2024 schedule, which is very challenging, right? As opposed to one tough matchup in the last 5 games, the Los Angeles Rams. The Saints will pretty much have one easy matchup, quote unquote, at the beginning of the season. That will be against the Carolina Panthers. I'm giving the Falcons a little bit more credit, probably an 8 of the conversation. So I could say that they have 2 easier games, but 3 very tough games against tough opponents without any shadow of a doubt. The Dallas Cowboys, the Philadelphia Eagles, and then, of course, the Kansas City Chiefs. So when I look at that, that's what I walk away with, is that the 2024 season, you have to be able to begin as quickly, as strong, however it is that you want to put it, as efficiently as you ended the 2023 season. Now, the good news for the Saints is that they could stumble through those first 5 games. They could go 2-3 and then still end up winning themselves into the playoffs with an easier schedule to close out the year. But we don't know if that schedule is actually easy to close out the year. We won't know until the teams get there. Who's injured, who's not injured, who's healthy, who's not healthy, who's a surprise, who's not surprising, who's disappointing, who's not disappointing. We can't answer all of those questions about what weeks, let's just call it 13 through 18. We don't know what that's going to really look like. So for me, the start has to be as strong as the finish was last year. The other thing that I look at in all of this too is, looking at the last 5 games that Derek Carr played, taking out that Los Angeles Rams game, which of course you needed to throw, you needed to get back into the game, all those other things, still pretty impressive. The 4 of those 5 games that don't include the Los Angeles Rams games were all 2 touchdowns or more, including a 3-touchdown game and a 4-touchdown game. He did have 3 touchdowns that he threw against the Los Angeles Rams as well. The reason why I highlight that is because he only had 3 multi-touchdown games in the first 12 games of the season. So just looking at the first 12 games of the season as compared to the last 5 games of the season, you can see where things finally fell into place. Now, it's a shame that it took 12 games to do that. If it was a little bit earlier, you had another Falcons game, you had a Minnesota Vikings game, you had a winnable Jacksonville game, you had a winnable Houston Texans game. If it would have just clicked a little bit earlier, we would be talking about an entirely different team here going into 2024, but it didn't, and therefore we're not. Now, one of the reasons why 2024 also becomes very intriguing for Derek Carr is not just because you want to see if he and the team, I'm trying to make sure that we're not looking at this just as being a Derek Carr thing, right? Like, how the offense performs is up to the offense. How the offense performs is up to how the defense sets them up. How the defense performs is up to how the offense sets them up, so on and so forth. So many different variables all impact one another. But I'm just trying to look at the Derek Carr lens of this because Derek Carr, as an individual player, has a lot to play for in 2024. So, as I was saying, one of the other reasons why it's most intriguing going into 2024, and one of the reasons why I feel like he does have a lot to play for, is because the Saints, and I can tell you this for a fact, do not feel that with the contract restructure that they did at the beginning of 2024 is going to make them have to stick with him in 2025. That's just not the truth. Now, a lot of the salary cap folks out there that look at the salary cap in one finite way will tell you that they're married to Derek Carr for 2025, but that's not actually true. If the Saints were to designate him as a post-June 1 cut, which I'm not saying that they should do, but I'm just saying if 2024 doesn't go well, and if the team ends with a losing record, has a high draft pick, and Derek Carr did not play well in 2024, the Saints would end up with a post-June 1 transaction with $21 million in dead money. That's not a lot for a quarterback. You'll take that, especially when on the other side of it, you get $30 million of cap savings. You come out on top in that conversation. $21 million of stuff that's already committed remains committed, but $30 million of new money shows up. Yeah, you're going to take that. Why does that happen? Because Derek Carr's already been paid out his guaranteed money. The base salaries of the first 2 years and then the big $57 million signing bonus, things that were fully guaranteed have already been paid out. So this helps the New Orleans Saints quite a bit. So if they were to move into 2025 and feel that they need to make a change at quarterback, they could absolutely make that change. So it's another reason why 2024 is so intriguing through the Derek Carr lens, because you've seen the potential. Now he has to realize that potential again, along with the rest of the team, along with the rest of the offense, along with the coaching staff, and along with the organization from the very beginning of the 2024 season. And he has a vested interest in doing so because the Saints can move on in 2025 if they wanted to. Let's take a deeper look at Derek Carr's contract. We got much more for you here on that as we continue on with today's episode. I want to take a look at how Derek Carr's contract was looked at when it was signed versus what it looks like now just one season later. Got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, and right now is a fantastic time to head over to FanDuel. It's summer. You've got Major League Baseball. You've got the WNBA in full swing. There's a ton going on in terms of Euro Cup and everything as well. You can also get on. F1 has been apparently fantastic over the course of the last week. I've seen a lot of chatter about it. I'm not a racing guy, but I've seen a lot of appreciation for it. So there's so much for you to check out over at FanDuel, including over in the WNBA. Here's a really easy one. Later on today, you're going to have the Seattle Storm taking on the Dallas Wings. 11.5-point favorites are the Seattle Storm. Is that too wide a spread? Do you think they could actually hit the top of that? You can get in on that over at FanDuel today. Tomorrow, Asia Wilson against Angel Reese as the Aces in the Sky take on one another. Oh, so much to get in on. And right now, all this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all new customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So go check it out today at fanduel.com/lockedon to make the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, family, with all of the hubbub and to-do around Derek Carr's contract ahead of the 2023 season, here just one season later, you're probably not going to hear much talk about it, considering where it ranks amongst what quarterback contracts actually look like these days. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Sports Today, the 24/7 stream. All of the big action going on around the NBA, trades, moves, the draft having just wrapped up. You want to be checking out Locked On Sports Today, curated to give you all the biggest stories from around the world of sports, covered by the folks that know the teams the best, that cover their team every single day, just like we do here on Locked On Saints. Make sure you're going to check it out. Locked On Sports Today. You can find it on YouTube and also on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Last year, when the New Orleans Saints signed Derek Carr as a free agent, they gave him this big contract, $37.5 million per year. Everyone talked about how he was overpaid and all these other things. And look, it was but it was a expensive contract for a quarterback. And especially because we're so accustomed now to seeing that kind of money being given to quarterbacks that are sticking around with their team. Right? They're being re-signed and given that money, not necessarily earning that money on the open market. Now, obviously, there are some exceptions of that. Some exceptions to that. Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers over the course of the past few years. This offseason, Kirk Cousins, whose contract should already be talked about far more than Derek Carr's contract, because at least the Saints signed their quarterback, paid their quarterback, gave that quarterback a bunch of guaranteed money, and then didn't turn around and draft a quarterback in the first round the very same offseason. So there are ways to manage teams, right? There are ways to do this, but you think about some of the other quarterbacks out there and where they sit. So let's look at it contextually now, a year later, to kind of see, okay, where is Derek Carr's contract and where does it stack up against the rest of the NFL? So when we look at it in I'm going to go three core categories, all right? The first one is average per year value. I hate the number. It doesn't actually mean anything. And I wish it didn't mean as much as it did, but it is the biggest bargaining chip in contract negotiations and all these other things. So because of that, I'll include it in here because it does still tell a story. Even though it's not necessarily the most important story, it does still tell a story, and it is the most important metric by which we look at contracts, unfortunately. So I'll give you average per year where he ranks there. We'll look at the amount that was total guaranteed versus the amount that was fully guaranteed, and I'll explain the difference. And then look at all these amongst the rankings. So this is going to go pretty quick. Average per year value, $37.5 million, is now 15th in the NFL. 15th, 1-5 in the NFL. And every quarterback above him from 14 up to 1 is paid more than $40 million. Okay, or $40 million or more, $40 million or more. Matthew Stafford, $40 million per. Daniel Jones, $40 million per. Dak Prescott, $40 million per. Josh Allen, $43 million per. See what I mean? So Derek Carr is the only one there at 37.5 that is being paid, or that is the first one at 15 there that's being paid, at under that $40 million mark. He is making the same amount as the 40-plus-year-old Aaron Rodgers and is making about, let's call it a little less than $4 million less than Baker Mayfield, who just got an extension with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Okay, total guaranteed money, he ranks 14th, 1-4, with $100 million. And then fully guaranteed, which the difference between total guaranteed and fully guaranteed is what is guaranteed in terms of total amount is your total guarantees. But what's fully guaranteed is guaranteed for like injury and things like that, right? So like if you get injured, you're not going to make your full amount of or your total amount of guaranteed money, but the things that are fully guaranteed, you'll still make. So the fully guaranteed amount is 16th in the NFL, $60 million. So now let's compare that to some of the rankings and where Derek Carr ended his 2023 season, okay? 13th in passing yards. Look, played from behind a lot, had to produce late in games because the team couldn't score early, all those other things. I get that there's context around that, but I'm just using the rankings versus the contract rankings, all right? So 15th in average per year, 14th in total guaranteed, 16th in total guaranteed, 13th in passing yards, 6th in completion percentage, 10th in passing touchdowns, 10th in passer rating, and if you'd rather, 16th in QBR, okay? Both are formulas that spit out a number and tell you how good a quarterback is, but use different metrics. And so maybe you're a passer rating crowd, maybe you're a QBR crowd, or you're part of the QBR crowd. Fine, there's both. That's fine for what, basing that off of the salary. Is that going to win you a Super Bowl? No, probably not. Is that going to win you a championship or get you threatening for a championship? No, probably not. But is that reasonable for a contract, or for this contract, which is basically dead in the middle of the NFL right now? Yeah, it's pretty freaking reasonable. And so that's one of the other things that I think is so interesting in terms of going from 2023 into 2024 is, can you now outperform the contract? Right now, things feel like what you would expect to pay a quarterback that is either just outside of or just within the top 10 of the NFL in some of the more major and, albeit they basic, passer statistics, passer metrics, however you want to phrase it. Now, can you go from that with the mid-level contract to outperforming the mid-level contract? Can you move all of those things that are 10th in passing touchdowns? Can you get into the top 10, right? Can you get inside the top 5? 10th in passer rating, can you get into the top 7, top 5? 6th in completion percentage, can you stay there, right? And then even if we go to, and we acknowledge 13th in passing yards, understanding that is a very contextual stat that has a lot to do with game flow, play flow, defense being in like prevent stuff and everything like that. But in any case, we shift how we talk about passer rating depending upon how we already feel, passing yards, depending upon how we already feel about that quarterback. We'll caveat it if we feel that that quarterback has underperformed elsewhere and therefore need to caveat the passing yards because, they didn't play the greatest competition and they were playing from behind a lot and a lot of prevent defenses because they were behind, all these other things. But then we elevate that stat of passing yards based on how good if we think the quarterback is really good. And then we change the way that we talk about passing yards. And I'm saying we as in like media. We change the way that we talk about passing yards to make it sound like, look at how many passing yards they threw for. They were in control of these games. The offense only moves because of what this quarterback is doing, so on and so forth. So the context and the, I'll call it temperature, by which or around which we speak about passing yards is completely framed by bias. It's completely framed about how we feel otherwise. So I'm trying not to fall into that trap. He was 13th in passing yards. Take that for what you will. In addition to being 6th in completion percentage, 10th in passing touchdowns, 10th in passer rating, 16th in QBR, and being a middle-of-the-road NFL quarterback contract right now. That's not terrible. But when it comes to 2024, what you want to see is, can you move from a contract making sense into outperforming or overperforming, right? Performing above your contract. Because as we mentioned to wrap up the last segment, the Saints do not have to stick with Derek Carr in 2025 if they don't feel that they need to. They want to because Derek Carr is their guy, but they don't feel trapped by his contract, even with the restructure at the beginning of this offseason. And speaking of that, when it comes to Derek Carr, the New Orleans Saints have their quarterback for now, but they've already begun their search for their quarterback of the future for the post-Derek Carr days. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. I've never been shy about my using BetterHelp. my pursuit of taking care of my mental health and mental wellness. And a lot of this trip that I'm on right now is because of advice that I've gotten through therapy of get away from work every now and then. Now, of course, I'm still doing shows, but it's because I love you and I wanted to take my family on vacation with me. So that was easy. But being able to express things like that, being able to still have the full recharge, like I cannot wait to get back to New Orleans and really get back into the grind because we're going to take everything to another level. Now that I've gotten some rest and relaxation away, I would have never realized that about myself were it not for having the conversations that I was having, albeit sometimes they very tricky and very challenging through therapy. And BetterHelp was a big time mode for me to be able to, or method rather, for me to be able to get into that mode. So look, if you've been considering therapy, I highly suggest giving BetterHelp a try. You can stop comparing and trying to figure out all the what ifs and everything like that. You can let all that go and instead start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints have their quarterback for now when it comes to Derek Carr, and they've also already begun their search for the quarterback of the future, and a lot of that has to do with some big-time changes in terms of the philosophy of how the New Orleans Saints have approached the quarterback position. We got that coming up for you here as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. And of course, we appreciate you very much for making us your first listen of the day every day here on the show. For your second listen, you got to go check out Jake Madison in Locked On Pelicans. The Pelicans trading for DeJounte Murray, adding him to that team along with Zion Williamson. And now all these conversations around Brandon Ingram going down as well, potentially being traded to the Sacramento Kings and other teams that could potentially be looking in on him. You want to keep up with all of it and know how the New Orleans Pelicans can look with their new look? Go and check out Jake Madison every single Monday through Friday over at Locked On Pels today. All right, so look, the New Orleans Saints have their quarterback for now, okay? And they're also actively searching for their quarterback of the future. Think about what New Orleans Saints quarterbacks have looked like in the modern era, right? The modern era. Drew Brees, Teddy Bridgewater, Jameis Winston, Taysom Hill, Trevor Siemian, Andy Dalton, and now Derek Carr, okay? Those are the 7 quarterbacks, along with guys like Luke McCown and a couple of others. But those are the 7 quarterbacks that have gotten either the most notable starts or starts in the most recent past since Drew Brees, right? So I'm not worried about when Drew Brees sat out for week 17 because the team had already sewed up their playoff seeding and then Luke McCown came in or anything like that. I'm not really worried about that stuff, although no disrespect to the Luke McCowns, the Jake Delhommes, the Mark Brunells of the world, the Chase Daniels of the world. No disrespect to those guys. But just looking at like post Drew Brees, the guys that have started have all been, with the exception of one player who started one game for the team, free agency acquisitions. Even Taysom Hill, who came into the league undrafted, came to the New Orleans Saints by means of Sean Payton snatching him up from Green Bay. Every single one of those guys has been a free agency acquisition. The one guy that this team drafted that started a regular season game in the more recent past was Ian Book. And it didn't go great because it didn't go great for anyone that week at all. That was awful. It was a game that probably should have never been played, but the NFL needed its primetime money. So the thing that you can look at that has been the through line of the New Orleans Saints pursuit of quarterbacks has been through free agency, not necessarily the draft. The quarterbacks that they've drafted have not really gotten those opportunities. Ian Book got an opportunity that none of the other rookie quarterbacks before him got. Tommy Stevens didn't even make the roster. Heck, they didn't even want to play him at quarterback, right? They wanted to move him over to tight end. Then he went over to Carolina, and then it all fizzled out from there. Garrett Grayson, come on, right? So you look at these quarterbacks that have been drafted by the New Orleans Saints in what we'll call like the modern era, right? Post 2006. It's not actually modern, but we'll call it the glory days, if you will. Since the glory days, none of those other rookie quarterbacks have gotten those opportunities. Now, all of a sudden, the New Orleans Saints have drafted Jake Haener. They drafted Spencer Rattler. And they're looking at these quarterbacks that could be NFL players. Not who's hitting the market. How do we go and grab someone off the market? How do you get your hands on a Jameis Winston, a Derek Carr, a Teddy Bridgewater, a Taysom Hill, a Trevor Siemian, and Andy Dalton. That's not the route that the New Orleans Saints have gone. In fact, you look at the roster right now, what it's about to be, unless Nathan Peterman surprises somewhere, it's about to be Derek Carr, the big free agency acquisition, and 2 drafted quarterbacks behind them. I don't think there was ever a time that we saw Drew Brees backed up by 2 quarterbacks on the roster that the Saints themselves actually drafted. There's always the veteran free agent or veteran quarterback that was bridging from year to year. The Luke McCowns, the Mark Brunells, the Chase Daniels, the Jake Delhomme. Well, not Jake Delhomme, but you know what I mean. Those guys. I think I said Jake Delhomme earlier too. He never backed up Drew. That was back before that. But anyway, you get what I'm getting at here. It's been a lot of free agency guys. This is really the first time that we're seeing, the Saints are investing in their own quarterback position, in their own quarterback depth chart through the draft. So why do I bring that up? We were just talking about the Derek Carr contract, right? I'm not going to go through it again, but we were just discussing that. The way that you have to look at 2024 is still very much a proving ground for Derek Carr. It's a proving ground for any quarterback that's not already Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or whomever you want to point to that is locked in, right? That's the future. That's the guy, right? There's no question about that for those organizations. When you're a post 32-year-old quarterback, you're typically not getting that next contract. There are the rare instances, which we'll list off some here in a moment, because I always want to be fair in these conversations. There are the rare instances in which they happen. Then there are the rarer instances in which they work out. But for the most part, like, you're having to prove yourself year after year after year at this point, right? You're not being looked at as the rookie that needs time to develop. And so therefore you get, your 4-year contract. You're not looked at as the second-year quarterback in his, mid-20s going into his late 20s that the team already feels really comfortable with. You're on that contract that could be your last starting contract at this point, right? Just think about contract life, not even Derek Carr. First contract, rookie contract, second contract is the extension. Maybe you get a third extension that takes you into your lower 30s, your early 30s. And then after that, everything is 1-year deal, 2-year deal kind of a thing. And even the 4-year deals feel like 2-year deals. Even the 5-year deals feel like 3-year deals and all those other things. That's where Derek Carr is right now. Like, that's the lifespan of the quarterback in the NFL. That's the way that contracts are structured throughout the lifespan of the quarterback in the NFL. It's got nothing to do with the player. It's got everything to do with a bunch of numbers, and that those numbers are dollar figures and age. Those are the numbers. So every now and then you get the Breeze, you get the Brady, you get the Rodgers. You rarely ever get them back to back on different teams and things like that. Shout out to the Green Bay Packers who somehow just keep figuring this out. But you get those guys in the league at some point that do get those contracts post. That was a very, very Shreveport of me. That was or West Bank. That was the guys that are getting contracts post 32 years old that were the elite of the elite already going into those contract negotiations. Then you have the Russell Wilsons, the Geno Smiths, those that get the contract based on something that they did very, very recently, like a Geno Smith, but even that extension was a short-term extension. Or you're coasting in to elite play or with elite play, but then drop off from elite play after you sign the contract, a la Russell Wilson, who's now on a 1-year deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Denver Broncos said, $80 million in dead cap. Yeah, we'll take it because somehow that was a better option. Then you have the Kirk Cousinses, the Matthew Staffordses, and the Derek Carrses, who Derek Carr, if he gets his next extension, would get that post 32-year-old extension at that point. So that's like your best hope, is that you get that Matthew Stafford, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr type of quarterback on a decent deal at that point. But each one of those guys has to earn that new deal, has to earn that new extension. So that's why 2024 becomes really important there. So now what the Saints have finally done is that instead of putting themselves in a situation to where they have to hope, right, have no choice but to hope that the post 32-year-old quarterback extension thing works, they have other options. And they flipped their coaching staff. The New Orleans Saints have never shown at least in again, starting from 2006 on, kind of the era that we're discussing here, have never shown an ability to develop quarterback talent. They've shown a really good ability to go out and get quarterback talent, have never really shown the ability to develop it. That can't be a part of the conversation anymore because the coaching staff is entirely new. And a lot of these coaching staff members have those development player development reputations. My apologies. So with Haener, with Rattler, and probably with other options that will continue to show up over the drafts of the next handful of years, they're going to have to be able to develop somebody eventually, right? Otherwise, you're just hoping to luck into the next free agency signing. And I don't think that that's a way that, based on the way that quarterback contracts look nowadays, that you want to be building your quarterback room, your quarterback roster in the modern era of the NFL. So developing these rookie quarterbacks becomes really important. Will it be one of the guys that's on the roster right now? Maybe. Will it be somebody that's added to the roster in the coming years? Maybe. We'll see. But the New Orleans Saints have begun their search for a future quarterback, which is more than we can say about what this regime was doing when Drew Brees was in the building. All they were trying to do was extend that window, as opposed to looking at what their next window was going to be. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, okay? Aside from Derek Carr, I've got 3 more players that have a lot to prove in 2024. Tune in tomorrow to find out who they are, what they have to prove, why they have to prove it, because it's a little bit different for everybody, and what they got to do to get there. We appreciate you very much. As always, making Locked On Saints a part of your day, and of course, making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Pelicans. A lot going on with the Pels. Check out Locked On LSU. Matt Moscone is back. Super, super fun. So we appreciate you very much. Hope that you're enjoying the episodes. We'll be back home soon, and we'll still have another episode for you tomorrow, even though I'm still traveling. So cannot wait to bring you more tomorrow. Thank you so much. As always, make a Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Learn how the family's doing, learn how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you. Oh, no. False start.